Dead America, Tales from Las Vegas, The Paramedics, by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Outskirts of Las Vegas, 2:11 a.m. Lola Harper walked through the convenience store, browsing the wide variety of chips and candy that seemed to taunt her from every shelf. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the aisles as she deliberated over her limited options. She strived to eat healthy whenever she could, doing everything possible to maintain her slim, athletic build that served her well in the demanding world of emergency medical services, but working the night shift on an ambulance made proper nutrition nearly impossible. The store was typical of its kind, narrow aisles packed with processed foods, energy drinks, and the kind of sustenance that kept shift workers and insomniacs functioning through the dark hours. A few other customers wandered the aisles, a trucker grabbing coffee for the road, a casino worker picking up cigarettes, and a young woman who looked like she was coming down from something stronger than caffeine. "We still have 6 more hours to go until we can get anything resembling real food," Lola muttered to herself, shaking her head in dismay. Her dark brown ponytail danced along her shoulders as she moved, the movement catching the attention of the trucker, who gave her an appreciative look before returning to his coffee selection. After another moment of internal debate about nutritional choices versus convenience, she grabbed a couple bags of sour cream and cheddar-flavored chips before walking up to the counter. As she approached the register, her partner Sam Mitchell walked up, carrying 2 giant cups of coffee, steam rising from the plastic lids in the cool desert air that drifted through the automatic doors. He stood a few inches taller than she did, nearly hitting 6 feet with a build that suggested he spent considerable time in the gym. Like her, he took health and fitness seriously, which made him shake his head in disapproval at her choice of dinner. "Chips for dinner again?" Sam asked, with the tone of someone who had watched this routine play out too many times. "Hey, don't judge," Lola replied defensively. "Not everyone has a chef wife at home who makes them a healthy dinner before every shift." Sam's wife, Maria, was indeed an accomplished cook who took pride in preparing balanced meals for her husband's irregular work schedule. It was a luxury that Lola, who lived alone in a studio apartment, could only dream about. "Aw, are you jealous?" Sam teased, knowing he was hitting a sore spot. Lola stared at her partner of 2 years with an exasperated expression that could have melted steel. "Yes, I am jealous," she said flatly. "I thought that was pretty clear." "Well, you shouldn't be tonight. She's visiting her family down in Texas, so I'm flying solo." Sam let out a chuckle as he set the coffee cups on the counter, the sound of liquid sloshing around inside the oversized containers. He pulled out his wallet and grabbed a $20 bill, handing it over to the person behind the counter. The cashier was a thin man in his 30s who looked like he hadn't slept in days. As he reached for the money, he was suddenly overcome by a soul-rattling cough that seemed to come from deep in his chest and went on for several uncomfortable seconds. The sound was wet and harsh, the kind of cough that made everyone in the vicinity take a step back. "You know what, buddy," Sam said, pulling his hand back slightly. "Why don't you go ahead and keep the change there?" He paused, looking at the cashier with a mixture of concern and revulsion. "I don't think I want to touch anything you've touched," Sam added honestly. "With a cough like that, you should be home in bed," Lola said, her medical training automatically kicking in as she assessed the man's condition. The cashier wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of something that might have been saliva or something worse. "That's good and all," the cashier replied hoarsely. "But unless I work through this, I'm not going to be able to afford that bedroom come the 1st of the month." The harsh reality of working without benefits or sick leave hung in the air between them. Both paramedics had seen enough of the city's underbelly to understand that this man probably had no choice but to work while ill, spreading whatever he had to every customer who walked through the door. The 2 paramedics looked at the cashier with sympathetic eyes before nodding and gathering their purchases. Before leaving, Lola reached into her pocket and pulled out a couple of heavy-duty cough drops, tossing them onto the counter next to the register. "It's not going to cure you or anything," she said kindly, "but they should help your throat feel better." The cashier opened his mouth to say thank you, but was immediately overcome by another violent coughing fit that seemed even worse than the first. He gave her a thumbs up through the spasm as she caught up with her partner, who was already back behind the wheel of their ambulance. The vehicle was a standard emergency response unit, white with red and blue stripes and enough medical equipment in the back to handle most situations they might encounter during their shift. Sam had already started the engine, and the idle rumble mixed with the sound of the radio chatter from dispatch. As Lola opened the passenger door, she could hear Sam talking to the dispatcher on the radio. "All right, we're en route. 2 minutes out," Sam reported. "Copy that. Drive safe," came the dispatcher's response through the static. Lola settled into her seat and buckled her seatbelt, already knowing they were heading to another call. "We got another one?" she asked, though the answer was clear. "Car crash about a mile away," Sam confirmed, checking his mirrors before pulling out of the parking space. "How bad?" Lola inquired, mentally preparing herself for what they might find. "At least one down for the count," Sam replied grimly. The phrase was their code for a fatality, someone who wouldn't be going home that night. It was a reality of their job that never got easier, no matter how many times they encountered it. "Hit the lights and roll out," Lola instructed. Sam did as instructed, activating the emergency lights and siren before pulling out of the convenience store parking lot. The red and blue strobes cut through the darkness as they accelerated toward the scene, and the siren's wail echoed off the buildings they passed. As he drove through the mostly empty streets, Lola climbed into the back of the ambulance to begin checking their go bag, the portable kit containing the essential medical supplies they would need for initial treatment and stabilization. She methodically went through the contents: IV supplies, oxygen mask, trauma bandages, medications, and all the other tools of their trade. Everything was properly stocked and ready for use, which was a small blessing on a night that was already proving to be busier than usual. By the time she finished her inspection and confirmed that everything was ready to go, the ambulance came to a stop at the scene of the accident. "Looks like your friend is out there," Sam said with a knowing smirk. Lola let out a bit of a sigh, knowing exactly who he was talking about without having to look. "Next cup of coffee is on me if you run interference," she offered. "I'll do my best," Sam replied, "but it's undeniable that he has a crush on you." Officer Bishop's romantic interest in his partner was something of a running joke among their circle of first responders. The man was persistent, she had to give him that, but his attention was unwelcome for several very good reasons. "He's old enough to be my dad's drinking buddy," Lola pointed out. "There's something to be said about experience," Sam countered with mock seriousness. "There's also something to be said about not breaking a hip in bed," Lola shot back. "You know how to stabilize those," Sam said with a grin. Lola stopped what she was doing to turn and stare at Sam with an expression that could have frozen lava. Her eyes bore a hole through him, and the intensity of her glare was enough to make him break into laughter despite the circumstances. Finally, he put up his hands in surrender, recognizing that he had pushed the joke far enough. "Okay, I'll make sure he stays on his best behavior," Sam promised. "Thanks, partner," Lola said with relief. Sam nodded and got out of the vehicle first, making a beeline for the topic of their conversation. Officer Bishop was exactly as Lola had described, a man in his mid-40s who was tall, fit, and completely bald. His police cruiser sat off to the side of the intersection, blue lights flashing and casting everything in an eerie, shifting glow. "What do you say, Bishop?" Sam called out as he approached. "Hey, Sam," Officer Bishop replied with a wave. "Just your standard steak dinner." "T-bone?" Sam asked, continuing the metaphor. "Take a look for yourself," Bishop said, gesturing toward the intersection. The two men walked over to examine the wreckage, where an SUV had completely crumpled the side of a small sedan. Shattered glass littered the asphalt like deadly confetti, crunching underneath their boots as they moved around the vehicles. The sound of their footsteps mixed with the ambient noise of emergency vehicles and the distant hum of late-night Vegas traffic. "Any survivors?" Sam asked, making his initial assessment of the scene. "Yeah, a young couple in the sedan," Bishop replied, pointing toward the smaller vehicle. "Most of the impact was on the rear doors. Half a second earlier, and the SUV would have caught the driver square in the door." Sam turned around and made eye contact with Lola, motioning for her to head to the sedan to take care of the survivors. She nodded and grabbed her medical bag, moving toward the damaged vehicle like she had 1,000 other times. Bishop turned around and saw who Sam's partner was for the evening, and his demeanor immediately changed. A smile spread across his face that was a little too eager for the circumstances. "Riding with Lola tonight, huh?" Bishop said with poorly concealed interest. Yeah, we make a good team, Sam replied diplomatically. I bet you do, Bishop said, with a tone that made Sam uncomfortable. Before Bishop could steer the conversation down a creepy path, Sam quickly changed the subject to more professional matters. So where's my fatality? He asked. Near the sidewalk, Bishop replied, his attention snapping back to the business at hand. The two men walked around the wreckage, stepping carefully over debris and avoiding the larger pieces of twisted metal. Sam looked back at the SUV and immediately spotted a large hole in the windshield, where the driver had been ejected during the impact. If nothing else, this job has convinced me to always wear my seatbelt, Sam observed. Truth be told, I'm not sure it would have mattered much in this case, Bishop replied with a grave tone. Sam was confused by the statement and the way Bishop had delivered it. What do you mean? He asked. The two of them walked the final few steps over to the body, a middle-aged man lying face down on the pavement, just short of reaching the sidewalk. From a distance, it looked like a typical ejection fatality, but as they got closer, Sam began to understand Bishop's cryptic comment. Look at his neck, left side, Bishop instructed. Sam pulled out a small flashlight, clicking it on and taking a knee beside the body. He shined the beam on the corpse's neck, immediately wincing as he saw a massive wound that looked like something had taken a chunk out of the man's throat. What in the hell is that? Sam asked, his medical training struggling to categorize what he was seeing. I think it's a bite, Bishop said quietly. Sam leaned in for a closer look, studying the wound pattern for a moment before nodding in reluctant agreement. The marks were unmistakably teeth impressions, far too large and aggressive to be from any domesticated animal. I think you might be right, Sam admitted, which opens up a whole bunch of questions I don't really want the answers to. That was my thinking on it as well, Bishop agreed. Before they could discuss the implications further, Lola's voice cut through the night air. Hey Sam, I need you over here, she called. Hey Bishop, do me a favor, Sam said as he prepared to leave. See if you can call someone from animal control. Maybe they can identify what we're dealing with here. Half the station is out sick with whatever bug is going around, Bishop replied, but I'll ask around and see what I can do. Sam nodded and walked over to Lola, already hearing the young couple arguing with one another as they sat on the rear bumper of their wrecked car. The woman was clearly agitated, while the man appeared to be trying to downplay his injuries. You need to go to the hospital, the woman was saying firmly. I told you that I'm fine, the man replied stubbornly. You're not fine. You're bleeding from the head, she shot back, pointing at a visible wound on his scalp. Is everything okay over here? Sam interjected, stepping into their domestic dispute. No, my husband is a stubborn son of a bitch, the woman declared without hesitation. Unfortunately, that's not something we can treat, Sam replied with dry humor. But you can take him to the hospital where he can be treated, she continued, not appreciating his attempt at levity. Honey, I'm fine, I promise, the man insisted, reaching over to take her hand. Is there a reason you don't want to go to the hospital? Sam asked. Yeah, I don't have insurance, the man admitted reluctantly. I don't want to go bankrupt just to be told what I already know, that I'm fine. The mention of money and medical bills caused his wife to ease off slightly. It was a reality that Sam and Lola encountered frequently, people avoiding necessary medical care because they couldn't afford it. She reached over and grabbed his hand, giving it a squeeze that conveyed both love and frustration. I don't care about the money, she said softly. I care about you being okay. And I'm fine, I promise, he repeated, though the blood trickling down his forehead suggested otherwise. So, you don't want to go to the hospital? Sam asked, making sure he understood the man's decision. No, I really don't, the man confirmed. Sam and Lola exchanged a look and a shrug, before Lola reached into her medical bag and pulled out some antiseptic spray and bandages. That's your call, and not the one I would make, Lola said as she began preparing to treat his wound. But at the very least, I'm going to patch you up so you're not bleeding everywhere. I appreciate that, the man said with relief. As Lola started working on cleaning and dressing his head wound, Sam's radio suddenly crackled to life with static and the dispatcher's voice. Sam, do you copy? Came the transmission. I got you dispatch. What's up? Sam responded, already sensing that their night was about to get more complicated. I have an urgent call at 4816 Maple Service Lane, the dispatcher reported. What's the situation? Sam asked, mentally trying to place the address. At least one person bitten, possible life-threatening injuries, came the reply. Sam looked around at the current scene, still processing the strange bite marks they had discovered on the fatality, and now hearing about another biting incident across town. "We're at the wreck you sent us out to," Sam replied. "Is there nobody else that can respond?" "We're short-staffed, Sam. You're all I got," the dispatcher explained. "Just get there as quick as you can." "Copy that, dispatch. We'll be there soon," Sam acknowledged. Lola looked up from her patient, already anticipating what was coming next. "Looks like it's going to be one of those nights," she said with resignation. "Where are they sending us?" "I don't know. I don't recognize the address," Sam admitted, pulling out his phone to look up the location. "Oh, it's that big strip club," the injured man suddenly blurted out. The scene fell completely silent as everyone turned to stare at him. The man's eyes went wide as he slowly realized how incredibly stupid he had been for volunteering that information. "And how do you know that?" his wife asked in a dangerously quiet voice. The man began hemming and hawing for several moments, his brain desperately trying to come up with an explanation that wouldn't get him killed. "Because, you remember when my brother called a couple weeks ago for a ride because he was drunk?" he finally managed. "That's where he was. I remember punching it into the GPS, that's all." The man began breathing a sigh of relief as his wife appeared to be calming down and accepting his explanation. Unfortunately for him, that piece lasted only about 2 seconds. "Wait," she said slowly, her eyes narrowing. "That was the night you were out for 2 hours?" The man's eyes went wide with pure terror as he realized that surviving the car wreck was going to be the least of his problems tonight. "Ma'am, just do me a favor," Sam interjected quickly. "Wait a little while before you really hurt him, because we're short-staffed tonight and can't afford to lose any more ambulances." "Don't worry," the woman replied with a smile that was somehow more terrifying than her anger. "We're not going to need an ambulance." Sam let out a chuckle as he and Lola began packing up their equipment and walking back to their ambulance. "Hey, where are you two going?" Officer Bishop called out. "We got an urgent call, Bishop," Sam replied over his shoulder. "They don't want to go to the hospital, and that guy doesn't need to go." "So what the hell am I supposed to do?" Bishop asked with frustration. "Call the morgue and a taxi," Sam suggested. "But we gotta roll." Bishop wasn't happy about being left to clean up the scene alone, but he understood the realities of their job. He gave them a reluctant nod as they hopped into the ambulance and prepared to head off to their next call, leaving him to deal with one dead body, one angry wife, and one man who was about to have a very bad night. Chapter 2. Sam and Lola sped down the road toward the strip club, the emergency lights cutting through the early morning darkness as they navigated the mostly empty streets. Both paramedics sat in the front seats, the familiar hum of the ambulance engine mixing with the occasional burst of radio chatter from dispatch. Lola noticed a concerning look on Sam's face as he gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. "Are you all right, partner?" Lola asked, studying his expression in the glow from the dashboard lights. Sam hesitated for a moment, as if he was trying to shake off whatever was bothering him. His jaw was tense, and she could see the wheels turning in his head. "Yeah, I'm good," he finally replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It doesn't sound like it," Lola pressed. "So out with it." Sam took a deep breath before responding, his eyes remaining focused on the road ahead. "It's just, we're headed to a call with a bite victim," he said slowly. "It's not the first time we've seen out-of-towners get a little out of control at a strip club," Lola replied with a shrug. Las Vegas strip clubs were notorious for attracting customers who pushed boundaries, especially during bachelor parties and conventions. The paramedics had responded to their share of incidents involving overly aggressive patrons and the inevitable consequences. "I know, but the SUV driver back there had a pretty nasty bite too," Sam continued, his concern deepening. Lola looked at her partner with confusion, not immediately making the connection he was drawing. "Are you sure it was a bite and not just the glass cutting him up?" she asked. "Car crashes can create some weird-looking wounds." "Yeah, it was clear as day," Sam insisted. Even Bishop saw it and agreed. Looked like teeth marks, not trauma from the accident. Lola processed this information, her medical mind trying to categorize what they might be dealing with. "2 bites back to back, that's a new one," she admitted. "It's not often we get to say that in this job." "Let's hope that's all it is," Sam said grimly. Sam made the turn into the strip club parking lot, which was in the process of being slowly emptied out. The establishment's neon signs still blazed against the night sky, advertising the kind of entertainment that drew visitors from around the world. Most of the patrons streaming toward their cars didn't look particularly disturbed by whatever had transpired inside the building. Instead, they appeared to be acting like their only care in the world was finding their next party destination before the night was over. Groups of men in wrinkled button-down shirts and loosened ties laughed loudly as they stumbled toward their vehicles, while others checked their phones for the locations of after-hours clubs and casinos. The scene was typical for a Vegas strip club on any given night. Sam honked the horn a couple of times to get a pair of drunk guys to move out of the way, allowing him to pull the ambulance up to the front entrance of the club. The building was larger than most, with valet parking and the kind of upscale facade that suggested this wasn't a dive bar operation. As they exited the ambulance and began gathering their equipment, a giant, muscular black man stepped out from the main entrance. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with the kind of build that suggested he had been hired as much for intimidation as customer service. "Hey, Moose, how are you doing?" Sam called out with familiar warmth. "Sam, good to see you again," Moose replied with a weary smile. "You too, Lola." The fact that they were on a first-name basis suggested this wasn't their first call to this particular establishment. In their line of work, certain locations became regular stops on their rotation. "Sorry it's not under better circumstances," Lola said as they approached. Moose motioned for them to follow him into the club, their conversation continuing as they walked through the entrance. The interior was dimly lit with red and purple lighting, and the air carried the scent of alcohol, cologne, and the industrial-strength air fresheners used to mask less pleasant odors. "It never is under good circumstances," Moose replied philosophically. "One of these days, I'm going to get you two up to the house for a cookout, just so we have some good memories about seeing each other." "How bad is it in here?" Sam asked, getting straight to business. "It's really bad, Sam," Moose said, his expression growing serious. "A cracked-out patron messed up one of my girls pretty good." "Yeah, dispatch said it was a bite," Sam confirmed. "That's underselling it," Moose replied darkly. Moose led them across the main floor of the club, past empty stages and scattered tables, where abandoned drinks sat forgotten. The usual energy of the place had been replaced by an atmosphere of tension and concern. He brought them over to a booth in the far corner, where a well-dressed male patron was applying pressure to a wound on a dancer's shoulder. The woman, who appeared to be in her 20s with bleached blonde hair, was clearly in pain, but trying to maintain her composure. A few other dancers stood nearby, watching with concern and whispering among themselves. "We appreciate your help, man, but the professionals are here now," Moose said to the patron. The man turned to see the paramedics approaching, relief evident on his face. He had blood on his hands and shirt, and his expensive suit was rumpled from the evening's events. He carefully maintained pressure on the wound with one hand until Sam could step in and take over. "I've been keeping pressure on it, but the bleeding just won't stop," the man explained, his voice showing the strain of the situation. "You did the best you could, man," Moose assured him. "Hey, Misty, take my man here to the back so he can get cleaned up. Give him a few drink tickets for next time." One of the other dancers immediately stepped forward, the shock of the situation causing her to snap into professional mode. She slid her arm through the patron's elbow and began escorting him toward the back of the club, treating him with the same courtesy she would show a VIP customer. Sam knelt beside the injured dancer and began his assessment, his hands moving with gentleness as he examined the wound. "Hey, Candy, my name is Sam," he said in a calm, reassuring voice. "Can you tell me what happened?" The dancer fought back tears and anger, taking a moment to compose herself before responding. Her breathing was shallow, and she was clearly shaken by the attack. "There was this group of guys, just like any other night," Candy began, her voice trembling slightly. "Well, one of their friends passed out at the table, said he hadn't been feeling well or whatever. They paid me to give him a private dance, to boost his spirits. 1 second I'm doing what I can to perk him up. Next thing I know, he's taken a chunk out of my shoulder." Sam nodded as he began carefully pulling back the bloody cloth to get a better look at the wound. The moment he removed the makeshift bandage, blood began pouring out freely, forcing him to immediately press back down with fresh gauze. "Okay, Candy, I don't want you to worry," Sam said with professional calm. "I'm going to take care of you. but we're probably going to have to take you to the hospital to get this properly treated." Candy looked over at Moose, as if she was seeking permission to leave work early. In the world of exotic dancing, missing shifts meant losing money, and medical bills could be financially devastating. "Girl, you do what you need to do. We'll manage," Moose said firmly. "That asshole is going to be paying for everything anyway," he added with conviction. "So get yourself that VIP hospital treatment." Candy looked back at Sam and nodded, indicating that she was willing to follow whatever medical advice he recommended. While Sam continued working on Candy's wound, Lola turned her attention to gathering information about the incident. "Hey Moose, what happened to the guy who attacked her?" she asked. "Oh, I locked his ass up in the holding pen," Moose replied matter-of-factly. "The holding pen?" Lola repeated, not familiar with the term. "Yeah, our clientele isn't exactly known for being well-behaved," Moose explained with a slight grin. "So we installed a secure room to hold troublemakers until the cops can come and collect them. Saves everyone a lot of hassle." "Is he still here?" Lola asked. "He sure is," Moose confirmed. "If you want to follow me, I'll introduce you to our guest." Lola looked back at Sam, who was deep in conversation with his patient. "Partner, are you good here?" Sam turned his head toward her with a big smile on his face, clearly enjoying the close proximity to an attractive woman in a sequined outfit. Lola responded by rolling her eyes and following Moose toward the back of the club. The two of them made their way through the main floor, passing empty stages and overturned chairs, before going through a set of red, felt-covered swinging doors. The back area was much more utilitarian than the main club, with concrete floors and fluorescent lighting that was harsh after the mood lighting of the entertainment areas. As they walked down a narrow hallway lined with storage rooms and offices, the sounds of agitated banging could be heard coming from a door at the far end. The noise was rhythmic and violent, as if someone was throwing themselves against a barrier repeatedly. Each step they took seemed to anger whatever was trapped inside even more, as if it could somehow hear them approaching through the thick walls. Lola began slowing down unconsciously, questioning whether her request to see the attacker had been wise. Moose noticed her hesitation and tried to reassure her. "Don't worry, I'm not opening that door," he said firmly. Lola breathed a sigh of relief as she followed the bouncer up to the secured door, which was rattling under the constant assault from whatever was on the other side. The violence of the impacts suggested superhuman strength or complete disregard for personal injury. As they reached the door, Moose clicked on a small security monitor that was affixed to the wall just to the side of the entrance. The screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of what appeared to be a small storage room. Lola stared at the monitor in complete disbelief, watching as a crazed man inside the room assaulted the door relentlessly with his fists and shoulders. His movements were jerky and unnatural, and his face was contorted into an expression of pure rage. It was as if he could sense fresh prey on the other side of the barrier and would do absolutely anything to reach it. "I'm not sure what he took tonight," Moose said, shaking his head, "but it fried his brain like an egg in a cast-iron skillet." Lola remained silent, staring at the creature on the screen and trying to figure out what could be wrong with him. The man's behavior was unlike anything she had encountered in her years as a paramedic, even dealing with the most severe drug overdoses and psychiatric emergencies. After several long moments, she backed away from the monitor, shaking her head in confusion and concern. "If it's all the same to you, I think we'll let the cops take him in," she said. "That's the call I would make too," Moose agreed. As they continued standing there, both of them transfixed by the disturbing images on the security monitor, another dancer emerged from what appeared to be a dressing room further down the hallway. "Hey Moose, can I borrow your friend there?" the dancer called out. "For what?" Moose replied, turning his attention away from the monitor. "It's Sandy. She's not doing so hot," the dancer explained with concern in her voice. "That's because she's sick," Moose said with a note of frustration. "I told her ass to go home when she showed up for her shift tonight." Lola looked at Moose with disapproval. "You're putting sick dancers on stage?" Moose put his hands up in a playful defensive position, grinning despite the serious circumstances. "Hey now, there ain't no kink shaming in this establishment," he said with mock seriousness. "If a man wants to empty his wallet for a woman who's sneezing on him, then more power to both of them." Lola stifled a laugh before following the dancer toward the dressing room. The space was typical of what she had seen in similar establishments: mirrors surrounded by light bulbs, clothing racks, and a couch that had seen better days. On the couch in the corner sat another dancer, who was leaning back against the wall and struggling to keep her head upright. Her skin was pale and clammy, and she appeared to be barely conscious. Lola approached carefully and took a knee beside the woman, pulling on latex gloves as she prepared to examine her. "Sandy, can you hear me? My name's Lola, and I'm here to help you," she said in a gentle voice. Sandy opened her mouth and tried to speak, but nothing coherent came out. Only unintelligible mumbling and what sounded like groaning escaped her lips. "How long has she been like this?" Lola asked the other dancer. "She's been out of it all night, but she really started getting worse about 20 minutes ago," the woman replied. "At first we thought she was just tired, but then she started acting really weird." Lola reached into her medical bag and pulled out a digital thermometer, placing it against Sandy's forehead. With a squeeze of the trigger, the device beeped and displayed a reading of 103 degrees. "Yeah, that's not good," Lola said grimly. "Look, if she needs to go to the hospital, take her," Moose said from the doorway. "We'll add it to that asshole's tab, along with everything else." Lola let out a brief chuckle at his business-minded approach to the evening's disasters, before quickly snapping back into professional mode. "Can you do me a favor, Moose?" she asked. "Whatever you need, girl," he replied without hesitation. "I need to stay here with her for a few minutes," Lola explained. "Can you go get Sam and help him with bringing in the stretcher? We're going to need to transport both of them." "We'll be back before you know it," Moose assured her. Moose walked away, leaving Lola alone with Sandy and the other dancer in the cramped dressing room. The air was thick with hairspray and perfume, and the sound of the trapped man's violent assault on the door continued to echo from down the hallway. "Don't worry, Sandy," Lola said softly, checking the woman's pulse and finding it weakening. "We're going to get you taken care of." Chapter 3. Sam sped down the road toward the hospital, emergency lights flashing and siren wailing at full blast as they cut through the early morning traffic. The ambulance rocked slightly as he took corners faster than usual, the urgency of their patient's condition weighing heavily on both paramedics. In the back, Lola worked steadily to monitor both patients during the transport. Candy was strapped into one of the side seats, doing her best to keep her head upright despite the pain from her shoulder wound. Sam had done a solid job patching her up for the ride, and the pressure bandage was successfully stopping the blood loss for the moment. On the main stretcher lay Sandy, who remained largely unresponsive. Lola had applied several cooling packs to the dancer's forehead and neck, trying desperately to bring down her dangerously high body temperature. The woman's breathing was shallow and irregular, and her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that Lola didn't like. "Is she going to be okay?" Candy asked quietly, her voice strained with worry as she watched her coworker. "As long as we can keep her body temperature down, she should be fine," Lola replied, though her tone carried less confidence than her words suggested. As they continued racing toward the hospital, Sandy suddenly began convulsing violently on the stretcher. Her entire body went rigid before starting to shake uncontrollably, and her eyes rolled back in her head. "Damn it," Lola cursed under her breath. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Candy began freaking out, tears streaming down her face as she watched her friend's condition deteriorate rapidly. Lola immediately grabbed a syringe from the overhead compartment, quickly checking the medication before injecting it into Sandy's arm. The anti-seizure medication caused the violent convulsions to settle somewhat, but they didn't stop completely. "Sam, how close are we?" Lola called toward the front of the ambulance. "We're half a mile out," Sam replied, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "Pick up the pace," Lola instructed. "What's wrong? Is she okay?" Candy asked desperately, her voice breaking as she struggled to maintain her composure. Lola stared down at her patient, monitoring the woman's vital signs while trying to process what might be causing such a rapid decline. She could hear Candy beginning to cry, the stress of watching her friend in such terrible shape wearing heavily on her nerves. Candy started to speak again, but Lola cut her off before she could finish. "Candy, I'm going to need you to stay calm, and most importantly, stay seated when we get to the hospital," Lola said firmly. "Your friend is in bad shape, and we need to get her inside as soon as we arrive. Can you do that for me?" Candy continued fighting back tears, but managed to nod her understanding through her distress. A few moments later, they pulled into the emergency room bay, coming to an abrupt stop that sent equipment rattling in the back of the ambulance. Lola immediately threw open the rear doors and jumped down to the pavement, grabbing onto the stretcher and beginning to pull it out of the vehicle. Sam came around from the driver's side, helping her maneuver the stretcher to the ground and lock the wheels in place. "Stay here, Candy. We'll be right back for you," Lola called over her shoulder. The frightened dancer nodded as she fought back fresh tears, watching helplessly as the paramedics wheeled her friend toward the hospital entrance. The two paramedics pushed their patient through the automatic doors, stepping into what could only be described as complete chaos. The emergency room was packed beyond capacity, with medical staff running in every direction. "Jesus Christ," Sam muttered as he took in the scene. Doctors and nurses were rushing everywhere, carrying supplies and trying to deal with an overwhelming number of patients that seemed to far exceed the hospital's normal capacity. Most of the treatment bays were occupied, and a significant number of people were seated in the hallway on chairs, gurneys, and even the floor. As they absorbed the chaos around them, a middle-aged blonde nurse approached their position. Nurse Watkins was the charge nurse on duty, and both paramedics knew her well from previous transports. She looked exhausted and stressed, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "Not tonight, Sam," she said before they could even begin their report. "We are completely overwhelmed and understaffed. Unless she's knocking on death's door, you're going to have to take her someplace else. She's got a temp of 103, been disoriented for the last hour, and 2 minutes ago she was seizing in the back of our ambulance," Lola replied quickly. "I don't think she's going to survive the trip across town to another facility." Watkins stared at Lola for a moment, clearly weighing the severity of the case against their current capacity issues. With an agitated sigh, she stepped over to the stretcher and began conducting a brief examination of the patient. Sandy was barely clinging to consciousness, her breathing labored and her responses minimal. Watkins checked her pulse and felt her forehead, immediately noting the high fever. "What's her name?" Watkins asked. "Sandy," Lola replied. "Sandy, I'm Nurse Watkins," she said loudly, trying to get some response from the patient. "Can you tell me how you're feeling?" Watkins pulled out a small flashlight and shined it into Sandy's eyes, checking for pupil response. The beams of light generated no reaction whatsoever, which was concerning for someone who should at least flinch from the bright illumination. After completing her quick assessment, Watkins stepped back from the stretcher. She looked around the crowded emergency room, clearly calculating where they might be able to fit another patient. "Put her in Bay 6, she finally barked to no one in particular. "I'll have someone over there as soon as possible." "We still got one more patient on the ambulance," Sam informed her. "Are they dying?" Watkins asked bluntly, staring at Sam with tired eyes. Her directness prompted Sam to shake his head in response. "We'll see if we can take her someplace else," he said. "That's more like it," Watkins replied with satisfaction before turning away to deal with other pressing matters. Nurse Watkins immediately pivoted and began calling out instructions to other staff members as Sam and Lola wheeled Sandy over to the designated treatment bay. The area was cramped, with medical equipment and supplies stacked on every available surface. As they got her situated and transferred to the hospital bed, Lola spoke to her patient in as comforting a tone as she could manage. "You just take it easy now, Sandy," she said softly. "You're in good hands here, even if Watkins is a bit of a hard ass when she's stressed." Sandy muttered something unintelligible for a moment before fading back into unconsciousness. "Come on, let's get the paperwork done so we can get out of their way," Sam suggested. The two paramedics stepped out of the treatment bay and began looking around for a nurse or orderly who could help get their patient properly situated. Unfortunately, the few staff members who had shown up for work that evening were all occupied helping other patients. "She'll be okay for a few minutes," Sam said, though he kept glancing back toward Bay 6. The two paramedics walked down the hallway to a workstation area where several other sets of paramedics were filling out their own transport paperwork. Sam and Lola began working through the various forms and documentation required for their patient transfer, but they were interrupted after just a few minutes by a familiar voice. "Lola, Sam, is that you?" called out someone from behind them. Both paramedics let out a defeated sigh as they recognized the voice belonging to Tommy Valdez. He was a man in his mid-40s who looked quite a bit older due to decades of hard living and excessive drinking. They knew him well, as he was one of their most frequent patients. "Tommy Valdez," Sam said as he turned around. "I wish I could say it was a surprise to see you here." Both Sam and Lola spotted the man sitting in a wheelchair near the nurse's station, his right arm secured in a sling. Despite his injury, he appeared to be in relatively good spirits and was grinning at them. "You know me, Sam," Tommy replied with characteristic humor, "always popping up where you most expect me to be." Sam let out a chuckle, shaking his head at the accurate self-assessment. "So, what did you do to yourself tonight, Tommy?" Lola asked with the tone of someone who had heard many similar stories over the years. "Girl, I didn't do shit to myself tonight," Tommy protested with mock indignation. "Your arm in a sling says otherwise," Sam pointed out. "Oh, come on now, Sam. You know me better than that," Tommy replied with a wave of his good hand. "You know damn well I can hold my liquor, especially this early in the evening." Both paramedics let out a laugh, nodding in agreement. Tommy's tolerance for alcohol was legendary among the local first responder community. "So, what happened to you then?" Lola asked, curious about how he had managed to injure himself this time. "Girl, I was sitting on the loading dock of that abandoned warehouse down near the tunnels, just having myself a drink and minding my own business," Tommy began. "Next thing I know, this crazy son of a bitch came running up to me, completely out of his mind on something. I don't know what it was, but it must have been some seriously good stuff because he had the munchies like nobody's business." Lola and Sam immediately exchanged a concerned glance with one another, abandoning their paperwork and taking a step closer to Tommy. "He had the munchies?" Sam asked carefully. "Damn right he did," Tommy confirmed enthusiastically. "The crazy bastard didn't care two licks about my bottle, but he wanted to take a bite out of old Tommy here." "He tried to bite you?" Lola asked. "Hell yeah, he did," Tommy replied. "Nearly got himself a tasty treat too, but I managed to push him off and get my ass out of there. I haven't moved that fast since grade school, I tell you what. Scurried up that chain-link fence like a squirrel being chased by a bloodhound." "How'd you hurt your arm then?" Sam inquired. "Well, old Tommy here may be fast when properly motivated, but he ain't the most graceful creature on God's green earth," Tommy said with self-deprecating humor. Tommy let out a laugh as he continued his story. "Getting up the fence wasn't the problem, you understand. Getting down the other side, however, well, that's where things got interesting." "Let me guess," Lola said with a knowing smile. "Gravity did the heavy lifting on that one?" Tommy let out a sustained laugh, shaking his head and slapping his knee with his good hand. "Girl, ain't that the truth," he said between chuckles. "Dinged it up pretty good when I hit the pavement and had to catch a ride out here to get it looked at." "If it's not life-threatening, then how did you manage to get it looked at?" Sam asked, gesturing around at the overcrowded emergency room. "This place is packed." "Sam, you know I've been in this hospital more than my fair share of times," Tommy replied seriously. "What I've seen the last few hours is something I've never seen before in here. I think I got here at like 9 or 10. I mean, when you live the kind of lifestyle I live, the specific hour isn't all that important." "What have you seen, Tommy?" Sam asked, leaning in closer. "Man, it's crazy," Tommy said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "This is Vegas, so there's always a wide variety of folks coming in here with all manner of injury. Tonight, though, just about everybody through those doors had some sort of bite." "I need to tell Watkins about the guy we left back at the club," Lola said quietly to Sam. "That's probably a very good idea," Sam agreed. Before they could go find the charge nurse to share their information about the violent patient still secured at the strip club, a horrific scream suddenly pierced through the ambient noise of the emergency room. A large male orderly came staggering out of one of the treatment bays with a teenage girl attached firmly to his back. Her teeth were sunk deep into the nape of his neck, and she was tearing at his flesh like a wild animal. Blood was streaming down his scrubs as he spun around desperately trying to dislodge his attacker. "Security! I need security!" Chapter 4. Sam and Lola watched in complete horror as the zombified teenage girl pulled her head back violently, taking a substantial piece of the orderly's neck with her. Blood spurted out in arterial sprays, splashing across the nearby nurse's station and coating the floor in crimson pools. The orderly collapsed, clutching his throat as his life poured out between his fingers. Several civilians throughout the emergency room, some patients, others family members waiting for news, immediately panicked and began running toward the exits. Screams echoed throughout the space as people trampled over each other in their desperation to escape. The young woman's father suddenly darted out of the emergency room bay they had emerged from, blood streaming down his arm from a fresh bite wound on his shoulder. Despite his own injury, he reached out for his daughter, grabbing onto her arms and trying to pull her away from the dying orderly, who had fallen to one knee. "Honey, what are you doing? Get off of him!" the father shouted desperately. The father was successful in pulling the creature away from the orderly, but in doing so, she immediately turned her attention toward him. His eyes went wide with terror as he realized he had made a fatal mistake. The thing that used to be his daughter lunged directly for his exposed neck. He opened his mouth to scream as her teeth ripped into his Adam's apple, but only an inaudible shriek emerged from his damaged throat. The man fell backward to the floor, allowing the creature to maintain her position firmly on top of him as she continued feeding. "Where is that damn security?" Nurse Watkins shouted over the chaos. The charge nurse broke away from her workstation, running toward the creature that was now feasting on the father. As she approached the scene, 2 other orderlies emerged from different treatment rooms, drawn by the commotion and screaming. The 3 hospital staff members converged on the young creature, each orderly grabbing one of her arms and lifting her completely off the ground. She thrashed about violently, trying to break free from their grip, her jaws snapping at the men who struggled to maintain their hold on her slippery, blood-covered form. "Throw her back into the room. I got the door," Nurse Watkins commanded. The 2 orderlies nodded and got into position beside the open doorway of the treatment bay. With a quick countdown from 3, they hurled her through the opening with all their strength. The ghoul slammed headfirst onto the linoleum floor, sliding to a stop near the back wall of the small room. Nurse Watkins immediately reached for the door handle, grabbing it and pulling the door shut as quickly as her hands would allow. Despite her speed, the creature was already back on its feet and rushing toward the closing barrier with superhuman velocity. The door latched just half a second before the zombie reached it, and she slammed against the reinforced glass window with tremendous force, smearing blood across the surface as she clawed and bit at the barrier, separating her from her prey. Watkins and the 2 orderlies stood there in stunned silence as an eerie hush fell over the emergency room. They couldn't take their eyes off the young woman, who continued attacking the door with single-minded focus, desperate to reach the living flesh on the other side. As they stared in disbelief at the creature behind the glass, a lone security guard came running up from the direction of the main hospital corridors, breathing heavily and looking disheveled. He stopped beside Nurse Watkins, and his attention was immediately drawn to the creature trying to break through the door. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I got here as quickly as I could," the guard said between gasps. Nurse Watkins turned to face the security guard, her voice carrying more than a hint of venom. "You're the emergency room security guard," she said through clenched teeth. "So tell me, what in the hell was more important than being at your assigned post?" "I got a call that there was a situation developing in the main waiting room and that they needed help," the guard explained defensively. "And did they?" Watkins demanded. "I don't know," the guard admitted. "I got halfway there before someone started yelling for help in here, so I turned around." "Well, you need to," Nurse Watkins began, but before she could finish her thought, one of the orderlies suddenly yelled out in pain. Everyone turned to see that the father, who had his throat ripped out just moments before, had somehow reanimated. The ghoul's teeth were now firmly embedded in the orderly's calf muscle, sending the man crashing to the ground as his leg gave out beneath him. His partner immediately rushed over, grabbing the zombified father by both legs and yanking him away from the fallen orderly. He pivoted his hips, using his considerable frame to lift the creature off the ground just enough to get momentum. He released his grip halfway through the turn, sending the ghoul flying into the nearest wall with a sickening thud. Before he could look down to check on his injured colleague, the fallen orderly began yelling in terror. The first man who had been attacked, the one who had his neck torn open, had also reanimated and was now a bloodthirsty creature. In a flash, it had latched onto the standing orderly's shoulder with its teeth. Rather than stay and help his coworkers, the security guard panicked completely. He turned toward the exit and began running as hard as he could toward the main doors, abandoning his post and responsibilities. "Where the hell are you going?" Nurse Watkins screamed after him. The man didn't answer or even look back. His only concern was getting as far away from the horror as possible, leaving the medical staff to fend for themselves. Before the fleeing security guard could reach the automatic doors, however, another set of paramedics came bursting through the entrance with a patient on a stretcher. The person strapped to the gurney was covered in blood and thrashing about violently, trying desperately to break free of the restraints holding them down. "We need some help over here," one of the paramedics called out urgently. The panicking security guard plowed directly through the first paramedic without slowing down, sending the medical professional crashing into the stretcher. The impact caused the restraints to loosen, allowing the creature strapped to the gurney to grab hold of the fallen paramedic. Before the man knew what was happening, the zombified patient had bitten deep into his arm, tearing through fabric and flesh with equal ease. While this fresh chaos unfolded near the entrance, Sam, Lola, and Tommy remained frozen in place near the workstation, watching the emergency room descend into complete madness around them. The only thing that broke their stunned stupor was spotting a familiar figure staggering out from Bay 6, the treatment area where they had left Sandy just minutes before. "Sandy, are you okay?" Lola called out as soon as she saw that the dancer was upright and moving. The dancer spun around at the sound of her name, immediately locking her now dead eyes onto Lola's position. Instead of responding with words, she let out a forceful, hungry moan that echoed across the emergency room. "Oh shit," Lola whispered. The reanimated dancer broke into a full sprint, rushing toward the three people standing near the workstation, who were approximately 15 yards away. Her movements were jerky but fast, and her face was contorted into an expression of pure predatory hunger. Sam grabbed onto his partner's arm, pulling her behind him to use his body as a shield. He didn't have any kind of weapon available, holding only a metal clipboard that wouldn't do much to deter the violent ghoul bearing down on them. Just before the creature got within striking distance, Tommy suddenly launched himself out of the wheelchair he had been sitting in, using his one good arm to propel his body forward. He hit the approaching zombie on the side with his shoulder, delivering enough force to send it toppling over the workstation. The ghoul slid across the top of the desk, scattering papers and medical supplies before landing hard on the other side. The impact sent two other paramedics who had been working at the station running for their lives. "Are you good, girl?" Tommy asked, breathing heavily from his exertion. Lola was stunned for a moment, processing what had just happened before managing to nod. "Yeah, thank you, Tommy," she said with heartfelt gratitude. "I don't know what y'all are thinking," Tommy said as he struggled to get back to his feet, "but I'm going to get the hell out of here while I still can." Lola and Sam's first instinct as medical professionals was to stay and help, since there were clearly plenty of people in desperate need of medical attention throughout the emergency room. But as they looked back toward the center of the chaos, they could see the creatures that had been feeding on the orderly getting back to their feet and beginning to search for fresh prey. One ghoul spotted an open treatment bay door on the opposite wall and immediately began running toward it at full speed. Through the doorway, Lola and Sam could see a doctor and nurse working frantically on a patient who was coding, completely focused on their life-saving efforts. The medical team never saw the attack coming. The zombie burst through the doorway, slamming into the doctor with tremendous force and sending him crashing down onto his patient. Across the room, Nurse Watkins caught their attention as she took a knee beside the orderly, who now had multiple bite marks covering his body. She was checking for vital signs, apparently unaware that the man was already beginning to reanimate. Lola took an instinctive step in Watkins' direction to offer assistance, but stopped abruptly when several more zombies came running through the main entrance. The creatures tackled people who were trying to flee the building, bringing them down to the ground and ripping into their flesh the moment they made contact. "Come on, we have to get out of here," Sam shouted over the screaming. "But we can help these people," Lola protested. "No, we can't," Sam replied firmly. To emphasize his point, Sam pointed back toward Nurse Watkins, who was now crawling backward away from the orderly as he began to reanimate before her eyes. She managed to scramble into an open treatment bay, slamming the door shut just as the newly turned creature got back to its feet and charged toward the room with single-minded hunger. "I'm following y'all," Tommy declared. "Where are we going?" Sam turned and began running toward a hallway door that was just a few yards away from their position. The three of them quickly reached the exit, with Sam throwing the door open and darting through into the hospital corridor beyond. He paused just long enough to look back into the emergency room one final time, watching as the space continued its descent into carnage. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, some motionless and others beginning to twitch with new, terrible life. The living and the dead fought desperately throughout the room, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to tell which was which. Chapter 5. Sam, Lola, and Tommy moved swiftly down a narrow hallway that connected the emergency room with the main hospital waiting area. The corridor stretched about 30 yards in length, with various administrative offices lining both sides, though none of them appeared to be open at this hour of the morning. Despite the heavy set of double doors behind them being tightly shut, they could still hear the terrible sounds of carnage continuing to unfold inside the emergency room. Screams, crashes, and inhuman moaning filtered through the barriers, creating a soundtrack of horror that followed them down the hallway. "Do either of y'all know what's going on back there?" Tommy asked, his voice shaking slightly as he struggled to keep pace with his injured arm. "I don't know, Tommy," Lola admitted. "But what are we supposed to do now?" Tommy pressed. "The first thing we're going to do is warn the waiting room staff that something is very wrong in this hospital," Sam replied. "Then what?" Tommy asked. "I'll let you know when we get there," Sam said curtly. Sam's matter-of-fact tone was enough to get Tommy to stop asking questions for the moment. A few tense minutes later, they reached the door that led into the main hospital waiting room. Sam reached out, grabbing the door and yanking it open. The sight that greeted him was another scene of chaos. The noise of the door opening immediately drew the attention of several creatures that were crouched over the motionless form of what appeared to be a nurse. The woman was convulsing violently from multiple bite wounds covering her arms and torso. The ghouls immediately launched themselves toward the door, running hard and closing the distance in a matter of seconds. It took Sam a crucial moment to recognize the threat and begin shoving the door closed, but his brief hesitation was all the time the creatures needed. One zombie's arm shot through the gap in the doorway, reaching through and clawing at Sam as he threw his full weight behind the door. Despite his considerable strength, the creatures had managed to wedge themselves into the opening, preventing the barrier from being fully closed. Lola put her weight against Sam's back, adding her strength to his efforts to keep the door from opening further. "What do we do?" Lola asked through gritted teeth. "I don't know," Sam replied, struggling to maintain his grip on the door handle. Tommy looked around frantically for some way to help, eventually spotting a red fire extinguisher mounted on the wall nearby. He rushed over to it, using his one good arm to yank the heavy cylinder down from its bracket and bring it over to where his companions were fighting to keep the door closed. "Lola, use this!" Tommy shouted. "I got the door!" Tommy put his shoulder firmly into Sam's back, taking over Lola's position and allowing her to step back with the fire extinguisher. She quickly examined the device, pulled the safety pin, and stuck the nozzle through the opening in the door. With a firm squeeze of the trigger, she sent a thick cloud of fire suppressant directly into the face of the lead creature. If she had done this to a living person, they would have immediately backed away, choking and disoriented. The zombie, however, was completely unaffected by the chemical spray and continued thrashing about violently. "It's not working," Lola called out in frustration. "Then hit it," Sam commanded. Lola nodded and flipped the heavy extinguisher around, using the metal base as a blunt weapon to attack the exposed arm at the elbow joint. She delivered several forceful strikes, each one powerful enough to shatter bones and tear flesh. The first couple of blows were sufficient to render the arm nearly useless, and a few more impacts sent the forearm bone protruding through the torn skin in a grotesque display. Once Sam spotted the damage, he grabbed onto the now lifeless hand and gave it a forceful yank, literally ripping it free from the zombie's body and allowing them to slam the door shut completely. Both he and Tommy kept their full weight pressed against the barrier for several long moments, listening to the creatures on the other side as they continued their assault. "Are you sure that's going to hold?" Tommy asked uncertainly. "The door opens from this side, but you need a key card to open it from the waiting room side," Sam explained, breathing heavily. "So, we should be safe for now." Tommy wasn't completely convinced by this explanation, but he nodded anyway, deferring to the paramedics' knowledge of the hospital's security systems. "We need to get off this floor," Lola said firmly. Sam thought about their options for a moment, before nodding in agreement and setting off down the hallway at a brisk pace. "There's a stairwell up ahead," he explained. "We need to get up to the next floor and warn the staff up there about what's happening down here." "Man, we need to be getting the hell out of this hospital is what we need to be doing," Tommy protested. "And go where exactly, Tommy?" Sam challenged. "We've responded to 2 calls tonight where people were bitten by crazy attackers. And didn't you nearly break your arm trying to get away from somebody who wanted to take a bite out of you?" Tommy considered this logic for a moment, slowly putting the pieces together in his mind before reluctantly nodding in agreement. "Yeah, man, you're right about that," he admitted. "But at least out on the streets, those psychos are spread out over the whole city. In here, it seems like they're all gathered for some kind of convention. And we're the overpriced buffet." Lola looked over at Sam and gave him a shrug that suggested she saw the merit in Tommy's argument. "I mean, he's not wrong, Sam," she said. Sam contemplated Tommy's point for a moment before shaking off his doubts. "Yeah, he may not be wrong," Sam conceded, "but I know people who work upstairs, and they deserve to be warned about what's coming their way." Both Lola and Tommy thought about this before nodding in agreement with Sam's sense of duty. "Okay, but after we warn them, we're figuring out how to get out of this place," Lola stipulated. "I can live with that plan," Sam agreed. "Come on." Sam stopped in front of the stairwell door, having learned his lesson from the previous door encounter. The paramedic pressed his ear against the metal surface and listened closely for any sign of trouble coming from the other side, feeling relieved when he heard nothing but silence. He carefully pulled open the door, and the 3 of them entered the stairwell, quickly making their way up to the 3rd floor, which housed the first level of patient rooms above the emergency department. Sam pulled open the 3rd floor door and darted through, ready to defend himself if necessary, but was relieved to find the area quiet and apparently normal. His defensive stance, however, completely caught one of the nurses off guard. She had been standing beside a patient's room and was startled by his dramatic entrance. "Can I help you?" Nurse Smith asked, staring at the paramedic with confusion. The nurse studied Sam for several moments, trying to make sense of his odd behavior and why he appeared ready for combat. Once he realized there wasn't an immediate threat, Sam visibly relaxed. "You need to lock this floor down right now," Sam said urgently. The nurse held up her hand toward her patient, silently indicating that she would be with them in just a moment. She then stepped closer to Sam, speaking in low tones so that only they could hear the conversation. "I'm sorry, but just who in the hell are you?" Nurse Smith asked with suspicion. "The name's Sam, and this is my partner Lola," he replied, gesturing toward his companions. "We brought a patient to the emergency room not too long ago, and while we were filling out paperwork down there, people started getting attacked." Nurse Smith rolled her eyes dismissively. "Have you ever actually worked in an emergency room?" she asked with condescension. "If you haven't been assaulted by someone before your lunch break, you're probably not doing your job right." "People are dead," Sam emphasized. Nurse Smith remained dismissive of his concerns. "Again, have you ever worked in an emergency room?" she repeated. "Death is kind of part of the territory." Lola finally had enough of the nurse's attitude and stepped forward, speaking forcefully and taking over the conversation. "Nurses and orderlies are dead, you ignorant twit," Lola snapped. "We need to lock this place down right now before those things get up here." Nurse Smith was taken aback by the verbal assault from Lola, who continued staring her down with intensity that brooked no argument. Before the nurse could formulate a response, a doctor approached their group from the central nurse's station. She was a middle-aged woman with a distinguished appearance and shoulder-length brown hair. Despite the commotion their conversation was creating, she maintained her professional composure. "What in the world is going on over here?" Dr. Hopkins asked calmly. "Doctor, you need to lock this floor down immediately," Sam said urgently. "For what purpose?" the doctor inquired. "Because people are going completely insane in the emergency room and killing each other," Sam explained. "There are at least 10 people dead down there, and probably a lot more by now." Dr. Hopkins studied Sam's face carefully, trying to get a read on his sincerity and mental state. She could sense the desperation in his voice and see the blood on his clothing, and something in his manner convinced her to take his warning seriously. "Nurse Smith, initiate lockdown procedures for this floor," Dr. Hopkins ordered. "But doctor, Nurse Smith began to protest. "Your objections are noted, but I'm not taking any chances with patient safety," Dr. Hopkins interrupted firmly. "Secure all the patient rooms, and we'll work on securing the main access doors." Hopkins motioned for the trio to follow her, as Nurse Smith reluctantly began following the lockdown order. "Just know that if this turns out to be some kind of elaborate prank, I'll have your jobs and probably press charges," Dr. Hopkins warned. "Ma'am, I can personally vouch for these two," Tommy interjected. "They're a couple of the most upstanding citizens in this sin-filled city, and everything they've told you is 100% the truth." The doctor turned and gave Tommy a skeptical look, clearly recognizing him from previous visits. "I see you in our waiting room at least once a week," she said dryly. "So, let me tell you that you're not exactly helping their credibility right now." Tommy let out a chuckle and put his good hand up in surrender. "Fair enough, ma'am," he conceded. The four of them moved quickly toward the far end of the patient floor, where the main entrance to their section was located. As they passed by the central nurses' station, Dr. Hopkins pointed to a couple of nurses who were working at their computer terminals. "One of you help Smith secure the patient rooms," she instructed. "The other ones start calling the other nursing stations and let them know we're implementing lockdown procedures until further notice." Both nurses immediately nodded and began following her orders, one getting up to assist with the patient rooms, while the other reached for the telephone. While the hospital staff worked to secure the area, the four of them continued moving across the floor toward a set of double doors that led to the elevator bank and another stairwell. As they got within 10 yards of the main entrance, the doors suddenly burst open with tremendous force. Two people, a nurse and what appeared to be a civilian, came running through the doorway in a state of complete panic. "Help us! Help us!" the man screamed desperately. The nurse stumbled as they crossed the threshold, with one of the heavy doors clipping their foot and sending them crashing to the floor. The civilian stopped immediately, reaching back to help the fallen nurse get back to their feet, but his act of compassion sealed both their fates. Half a dozen creatures suddenly poured through the opening like water through a burst dam, swarming over the two people in an instant. Terrified screams filled the patient floor as flesh was ripped from bone and blood splattered across the clean hospital tiles. Dr. Hopkins stared at the horrific scene in complete shock, her medical mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. The other three began retreating toward the nurse's station, with Sam grabbing onto the doctor's arm and physically pulling her along with them. "We have to hide." Chapter 6. Sam grabbed onto Lola's arm, pulling her behind the nurse's station as the chaos erupted around them. Tommy and Dr. Hopkins quickly followed suit, ducking down for cover behind the short wall that surrounded the central workstation. The four of them crouched in silence, not wanting to attract the attention of the creatures that had just burst onto the floor. They could hear the horrific sounds of flesh being torn from bone as the mob of zombies pounced on the two unfortunate people who had tried to flee through the doors. The paramedics and their frequent patient had quickly become accustomed to these terrible sounds during their time in the emergency room, but Dr. Hopkins appeared to be in the middle of a full-blown panic attack. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, and her hands were shaking uncontrollably as she struggled to process what she was witnessing. The clinical detachment that had served her well throughout her medical career was completely inadequate for dealing with this nightmare scenario. Lola noticed the doctor's distress and reached over, placing her hand gently on Hopkins' trembling fingers. She gave several tight, reassuring squeezes, trying to get the doctor to focus on something other than the carnage just yards away. With some effort, she managed to get Hopkins to take several deep breaths, helping her regain some measure of composure. Sam raised his hand up, silently signaling for the others to stay behind cover, while pointing to indicate that he was going to take a peek over the barrier to assess their situation. Both Lola and Tommy shook their heads forcefully, clearly disapproving of his plan. Dr. Hopkins went into a moment of deep thought before her eyes suddenly went wide with concern. She reached over and grabbed Sam firmly by the wrist, pulling him back down to the ground and shaking her head emphatically about his reconnaissance plan. Sam glared at her with his eyes opened as wide as they would go, trying to communicate the necessity of gathering information about their predicament. But she remained firm in her opposition, continuing to shake her head. The doctor held up a single finger, silently telling him to wait just a moment while she formulated an alternative plan. She carefully inched her way down along the barrier for a few feet before turning to face the wall. Reaching up toward the surface of the nurse's station, her fingers found a laptop computer that had been left sitting on top of the workstation. She grimaced as she lifted the device, straining under its weight due to the awkward angle. and fearful that any noise might draw unwanted attention to their hiding spot. She managed to get the laptop high enough off the surface to pull it back toward their position without making a sound. However, a computer mouse was still connected to the device via its cord, and it was pulled off the desk as she moved the laptop. She reacted with lightning reflexes, throwing out her free hand and managing to catch the mouse before it could clatter against anything and give away their position. The doctor looked over at the others with an expression of profound relief, knowing how close they had come to being discovered and swarmed by the creatures. She then slid back over to her original position, sitting down and gently working to boot up the laptop without creating any noise. Within a matter of seconds, she had accessed the hospital's security system and pulled up a screen filled with 9 different camera angles that showed every section of the patient floor. They could see the zombies still tearing apart the 2 victims near the main entrance, but the creatures were beginning to lose interest in their meal, which confused the doctor. Lola noticed Hopkins' bewilderment and used hand signals to try to communicate that the people on the ground were going to reanimate soon, which only increased the doctor's level of concern. Rather than dwell on this disturbing information, Hopkins refocused her efforts on the computer screen, searching for a solution to their desperate situation. She systematically examined the camera feeds from all the patient rooms on the floor, noting that most of the doors were closed and secured. She could see Nurse Smith standing at one of the windows, looking out with panic clearly etched across her face as she watched the horror unfolding in the main corridor. It took several more moments of careful scanning before Hopkins found exactly what she was looking for, a patient room with an open door. She began typing softly on the keyboard, being extremely careful not to make any sound that might alert the creatures to their presence. She pulled up the control interface for the medical equipment in that particular room, noting that all the machines were currently set to silent mode. The doctor motioned for Sam to move closer, pointing first to the room displayed on the computer screen and then indicating its physical location on the floor, which was directly across from their current hiding position. She hesitated for a moment, trying to figure out how to explain her plan without speaking aloud. Finally, she opened a note-taking program on the laptop and began typing a message. When she finished, she turned the screen towards Sam so he could read her words. The message read, "I'm going to trip the heart monitor alarm in that room. It's loud, and hopefully those things will run toward the sound. When they do, we need to get to that door and shut them inside. Will that work?" Sam read the plan carefully before turning to the doctor and nodding his agreement. He then turned to Lola, who was looking noticeably concerned about the risks involved. He gave her what he hoped was a reassuring smile and a thumbs up, even though he didn't feel nearly as confident as he was trying to appear. But they didn't have any weapons to fight with, so this improvised plan was their best option. Sam shifted into a crouch position, ready to make his move the moment the doctor initiated her diversion. Once he gave her the signal that he was prepared, Dr. Hopkins activated the heart monitor alarm in the empty patient room. The piercing electronic sound immediately filled the air, and in response, excited moans erupted from the creatures throughout the corridor. This was quickly followed by the thunderous sound of multiple sets of feet running across the floor. The 4 hiding survivors watched in fascination as the zombies raced past their position, completely ignoring their hiding spot as all 8 creatures focused solely on the ear-piercing alarm. They moved like a pack of predators, thundering across the open space and reaching the source of the sound within seconds. Once the first zombie crossed the threshold into the patient room, Sam made his move. He stayed as low as possible, wanting to maintain as much cover as he could in case more creatures came through the entrance. He carefully made his way to the other side of the nurse's station, then poked his head up just enough to get a clear view of the situation. The zombies had poured into the room and were now slamming into the noisy heart monitor with tremendous force. He could hear the heavy piece of medical equipment being smashed against the wall as their hands and bodies beat against it in their frenzy to silence the sound. Sam watched carefully as the last zombie entered the room, noting with relief that none of them had turned around to look in his direction. They were completely fixated on destroying the source of the noise. The paramedic took a deep breath and made his move, leaping up and over the top of the nurse's station barrier before landing hard on the other side. Unfortunately, the noise he made upon impact was enough to attract the attention of the final ghoul to enter the room, a zombified nurse who had been at the back of the pack. The creature turned around and spotted Sam, letting out an excited moan before breaking into a run directly toward him. Sam realized he wasn't going to be able to reach the door before the zombie caught him, so he lowered his head and extended his arms forward, bracing himself for the inevitable collision. Sam managed to get down just low enough to avoid the outstretched arms of the attacking zombie, which allowed him to plant both hands firmly against the creature's chest. He strained with every muscle in his body, putting everything he had into pushing the ghoul backward and managing to lift it off its feet just long enough to redirect its momentum. The zombie stumbled backward into the patient room, falling into the backs of its fellow creatures, who were still busy destroying the heart monitor. By the time the other ghouls realized that Sam was standing at the entrance, he had already grabbed the door handle and pulled it shut, effectively sealing all of them inside the room. The trapped creatures immediately rushed toward the door, smacking against the reinforced glass with their fists and pressing their faces against the window. Their teeth chattered against the barrier as they stared at the fresh meat that was tantalizingly just out of their reach. Sam stood there for a moment, breathing heavily and feeling relieved that the zombies didn't seem to understand how to operate door handles. However, a moment later, he heard a distinctive metal thunking sound coming from the direction of the door mechanism. He turned around to see Dr. Hopkins standing nearby, with the laptop still in her hands, a satisfied expression on her face. "You can move away from the door now, Sam," she said. "It's secure." "What the hell was that sound?" Sam asked, still catching his breath. "New security features that were installed last year," Hopkins explained. "They weren't exactly designed for situations like this, but those doors will hold regardless of what's trying to get through them." "And the main entrance doors?" Sam inquired. "Tommy and I got them locked down while you were dealing with our unwanted guests," Lola replied. Sam watched as his partner and their frequent patient made their way back to the nurses' station from the main doors. He walked over to join them and the doctor at their impromptu command center. "That was some quick thinking, Doc," Sam said with admiration. "It's not the first time I've had to deal with a hospital lockdown," Dr. Hopkins replied. "It is definitely the first time I've had to deal with whatever the hell this situation is, though. Is this what's been happening downstairs in the emergency room?" All three of her companions nodded grimly. "It's going on outside the hospital, too," Lola added. "Our last 2 calls tonight were responding to bite victims. I don't know what's causing this exactly, but something is driving people to attack and try to eat other human beings. And if they get bitten and die from their wounds, they come back and start trying to bite others too," Sam continued. "Zombies, man, just call them zombies," Tommy interjected matter-of-factly. The other 3 looked at their frequent patient in disbelief, not sure what to make of his casual proclamation. "Zombies? Really? Are you completely out of your mind?" Dr. Hopkins asked. "Hell yeah, I'm out of my mind, Doc," Tommy replied with a grin. "Why do you think I'm in this hospital so much?" Hopkins contemplated his logic for a moment before shrugging and nodding, conceding that he had a valid point about his mental state. "But you know, that doesn't make me wrong about this," Tommy continued. "People are going crazy and eating other people. That's some zombie-ass shit if I've ever heard of it." "It doesn't matter what we call them," Sam said, trying to refocus the conversation. "They're dangerous, and there are a lot of them throughout this hospital. Which is exactly why I have no intention of staying here any longer than necessary," Lola declared. "Where do you want to go?" Sam asked practically. "I know how much we make as paramedics, so I can't imagine you live in some high-end secure building, because I sure as hell don't." "I live in some cheap apartments on the south side of town," Lola admitted. "East side and same story here," Sam replied. The 2 paramedics turned expectantly to Dr. Hopkins, who shook her head. "Oh, I'm staying right here," she said firmly. "Somebody needs to watch after these patients, and this place is locked up tight now. We should be safe until help arrives." "That's your call, Doc, but I don't trust that this lockdown will hold indefinitely," Sam said with concern. "Lucky for my patients, I do trust it," Hopkins replied with conviction. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go check on them and let the staff know what we're dealing with. Just let me know when you want me to unlock the doors so you can leave." The group nodded respectfully to the doctor as she walked away to attend to her responsibilities. "So, do we try to get out of the city entirely?" Lola asked once Hopkins was out of earshot. "And go where exactly?" Sam responded. "It's not like we're surrounded by vast wilderness or anything. We're in the middle of the Nevada desert." "We can go to my place," Tommy offered unexpectedly. The paramedics looked over at their frequent patient with confusion and surprise. "You actually have a place to live?" Sam asked skeptically. In a manner of speaking, Tommy replied with a mysterious smile. I've got a handful of roommates, of course, but they're friendly folks who welcome all newcomers. Hell, you probably know half of them from your various calls around the city. Recognition dawned on Lola's face. You're talking about the tunnels, aren't you? Oh, Jesus Christ, Sam muttered. You really are completely out of your mind. Exactly, man. I am totally out of my mind, Tommy agreed enthusiastically. Because nobody in their right mind would willingly go into the storm drain tunnels in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. And that's exactly why we need to go there, because nobody else is going to want to. Lola and Sam exchanged a meaningful look, having one of their silent partner debates that had become second nature after years of working together. After a long moment of consideration, they gave each other a half-hearted nod of agreement. I'm not sure what we're going to do for food and water down there, Sam said with resignation, but I do like the idea of not being around large groups of people right now. Hey now, we may live in the tunnels, but that doesn't mean we don't know how to take care of ourselves, Tommy protested with pride. We've got plenty of food and water stashed down there. Don't you worry about that. Okay, the tunnels it is then, Sam decided. Let's find something to defend ourselves with and get moving, because if it's this bad now in the middle of the night, I can't even imagine what this city's going to be like when the sun comes up. Chapter 7. Sam, Lola, and Tommy stood positioned by the stairwell door, each gripping their improvised weapons with white knuckles. Sam held a small pocket knife that had been confiscated from one of the patient's personal belongings, while Lola clutched a wooden chair leg that she had broken off from a waiting room chair. Tommy gripped a claw hammer that he had borrowed from a maintenance toolbox, holding it tightly in his one good arm. Well, this isn't exactly an arsenal we're working with here, Sam observed grimly as he tested the weight of the small blade. It's better than nothing, Lola replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Let's see if you're still saying that 10 minutes from now, Tommy joked. Lola shrugged, conceding his point about their less-than-ideal equipment. So, how do we do this, Sam? She asked. We're not making it to the tunnels on foot, and the only vehicle we have access to is our ambulance parked outside. Sam went into deep thought for several moments, considering their limited options, before turning back toward the nurse's station, where Dr. Hopkins was having a quiet conversation with a couple of the remaining staff members. He walked over to get her attention. Are you ready to make your run for it? Hopkins asked as she noticed his approach. Just about, Sam replied. But I have a question first. Go for it, she said, setting down her clipboard. Do you have access to security cameras for other floors on that laptop? Or is it just for this level? Sam inquired. You know, I'm not entirely sure, Hopkins admitted. But there's only one way to find out. Hopkins grabbed her laptop and began typing rapidly, pulling up the camera interface. She navigated through the settings menu, which allowed her to cycle through multiple floors of the hospital. I think we're in business, she announced after a moment. Hopkins stepped back, allowing Sam to take control of the laptop. He began filtering through the various camera feeds, eventually accessing the ones monitoring the first floor. Everyone gathered around to look at the screen, and they were all horrified by what they saw. Zombies were running rampant throughout every area of the ground level. The emergency room, waiting area, and check-in desk were all completely overrun with ghouls wandering aimlessly or feeding on victims. Man, there ain't no way in hell we're making it through that nightmare, Tommy said, shaking his head. What about the second floor? Lola suggested. Sam switched to the second floor camera feeds, which showed a collection of public seating areas and consumer-facing locations like the hospital cafeteria and gift shop. Despite being designed for public access, there were only a scattered handful of zombies roaming around those areas. It looks like something we might be able to handle, Sam said cautiously, but I don't see how it helps us get outside. Think about the covering over the ambulance loading zone, Lola prompted. Yeah, it's tall and made of concrete, Sam replied, not immediately understanding her point. What about it? Lola let out a sigh of frustration, shaking her head before taking control of the camera system. She pulled up a view that showed the exterior wall of the building, revealing a large bank of windows. Think about when we pull our ambulance into the loading zone and look up, she explained patiently. Sam thought about their usual routine for a moment, suddenly realizing what Lola was getting at. There was indeed a large bank of windows positioned directly above the covered loading area where they parked. "Good catch, partner," Sam said with admiration. "If we can get to those windows, we can break through and hopefully jump down to our ambulance." "Oh, wonderful. Another fall on the agenda for old Tommy here," their frequent patient said with resignation. "Don't worry, we've got plenty of medical supplies in the back of the ambulance," Lola said with a laugh, playfully smacking Tommy on his good arm in an attempt to lighten the mood. Her effort worked, earning a reluctant smirk from him. "That's our plan then," Sam decided. "Let's do this." The three of them walked back over to the stairwell door, with Dr. Hopkins following close behind to see them off. "Doctor, are you absolutely sure we can't convince you to come with us?" Lola asked one final time. "I told you, my patients need me," Hopkins replied firmly. "Plus, I honestly think it's going to be much safer staying locked up in here than going out there." "Doc, with all due respect, I think you're making a mistake," Sam said seriously. "If this outbreak is as widespread as it appears, things could get out of hand in a hurry." "Sam, I've made up my mind about this," Hopkins said with finality. "But I do appreciate that you care enough to keep trying to change it." Hopkins extended her hand for a farewell handshake, which Sam reluctantly accepted. "Just know that once I close this door behind you, I'm not opening it again," she warned. "I can't put my people at risk." "It's okay, Doc," Sam replied. "We're not planning on coming back." Sam positioned himself beside the stairwell door, glancing back to make sure his two companions were ready to move. Both Lola and Tommy gave him quick nods indicating their readiness, and he pushed through the door into the concrete stairwell. Sam rushed out onto the landing, with his pocket knife held ready to strike at any threats. Much to his relief, nothing was waiting for them in the immediate area. Lola and Tommy followed close behind, stopping just behind him on the narrow landing. Dr. Hopkins gave them one more concerned look before pulling the heavy door shut behind them. The closure sent a metallic ringing sound echoing throughout the vertical concrete chamber. Several floors above them, the unmistakable sounds of excited moanings began bouncing off the walls in response to the noise, filling all three survivors with terror. "We gotta move!" Sam hissed urgently. Sam led the trio down one flight of stairs to the second level, while the sound of thundering footsteps echoed from somewhere high above them. The ominous noise motivated the group to move much faster, and they quickly reached the second floor landing. "Lola, get the door!" Sam commanded. Sam positioned himself beside the entrance, ready to charge through the moment it opened. With a firm nod of understanding, Lola grabbed the handle and pulled the door wide, allowing Sam to launch himself through the opening without knowing what to expect on the other side. The moment he crossed the threshold, Sam found himself colliding directly with a zombie who appeared to be just as surprised to have a fresh meal land in his vicinity as Sam was to find himself in this predicament. Sam immediately began stabbing frantically at the creature with his small knife, managing to catch it several times in the torso, while using his free hand to maintain a grip around the ghoul's throat. Despite turning the creature into a human pincushion with multiple stab wounds, the zombie didn't lose any strength or even seem to react to being repeatedly punctured. Sam let out a yell of frustration as the creature's legs became tangled with his own, sending both of them crashing to the carpeted floor. The paramedic continued stabbing desperately, hoping that his next attack would finally be the one to stop the creature. But none of his strikes to the body seemed to affect the ghoul in the slightest. His strength was beginning to fade from the exertion, and the zombie was managing to push its head closer in an attempt to bite into his exposed flesh. Just before the creature could sink its teeth into Sam's neck, Tommy stepped forward and delivered a devastating strike to the zombie's head with his claw hammer. The single blow cracked the skull with a wet sound, sending a spray of blood and brain matter flying across the carpet and instantly ending the creature's unnatural existence. Sam looked up at Tommy with gratitude, seeing his frequent patient standing ready with his bloody hammer, prepared to take down the next threat that was already running in their direction. "Come on, man! I told you there were zombies!" Tommy said with exasperation. "You gotta aim for the head." Sam pulled himself up from the floor, not wanting to admit that their frequent patient had been right all along about the nature of their enemies. "Okay, aim for the head," Sam acknowledged. "Got it." Tommy gave his friend an approving nod before the trio began running across the open public area toward the windows, which were located several hundred yards away at the far end of the space. The noise from their violent entrance had attracted the attention of multiple zombies throughout the area, and they were now converging on their position. The ghouls were spread out across the wide space, with at least 5 yards separating the various creatures as they approached. Tommy ran directly toward the nearest zombie, his hammer raised and ready to strike. He swung at precisely the right moment, catching the creature squarely in the side of its head. The ghoul was launched off its feet by the tremendous impact, losing all motor function from the devastating blow to its brain. It collapsed to the floor and slid directly into Lola's path, forcing her to stop and deliver several additional strikes with her chair leg to ensure it stayed down. Tommy quickly assessed the situation and realized that the dozen zombies still ahead of them would be far too many for their small group to overcome, especially considering that neither Lola nor Sam had yet demonstrated particular skill at defending themselves against these creatures. "Sam, get to the window," Tommy shouted. Sam didn't have time to respond before Tommy suddenly picked up his pace and cut hard to the right, running directly into a furniture seating area while yelling at the top of his lungs. Most of the approaching zombies immediately changed direction to follow this new, louder target, leaving just 3 creatures for the paramedics to handle. "Aim for the head! Aim for the head!" Sam repeated to himself like a mantra, trying to stay focused as he prepared to engage the next zombie. He raised his pocket knife to head level and picked up as much speed as he could manage before reaching the approaching ghoul. Sam let out a battle cry as he thrust the small blade forward, driving the tip deep into the creature's eye socket. The knife sliced straight through to the brain, with the hilt cracking the orbital bone as Sam's forward momentum pushed the zombie's head backward and down to the ground. His grip on the blade handle was firm, and the sudden dead weight dropping to the floor sent him tumbling forward as well. Sam did his best to roll with the momentum, coming to rest against a set of oversized waiting chairs. A split second later, another zombie slammed into the back of the chair, toppling over the furniture and crashing down directly toward Sam's prone position. The paramedic let out a scream of terror as he thrust his leg upward, catching the falling creature squarely in the chest with his boot. Sam strained every muscle in his leg to keep the thrashing zombie elevated above him as it reached down desperately, trying to grab onto its prey. The paramedic let out another panicked scream as the ghoul managed to grab onto his lower leg and began trying to pull its head down toward the exposed flesh. Sam struggled frantically to kick the creature away, but the zombie had latched on with a grip like a steel trap. Just before it could sink its teeth into his leg, Lola rushed forward with her wooden chair leg, swinging the improvised weapon as hard as she could manage. The makeshift club caught the creature directly on the top of its skull with a sickening crunch. She continued swinging repeatedly, cracking the bone over and over until she was certain the threat had been eliminated. "It's dead! It's dead!" Sam shouted, trying to get her to stop the assault. Lola finally ceased her attack, allowing Sam to kick the lifeless creature off his body. She reached down to help him back to his feet. "Are you okay?" she asked with concern. "Yeah, barely," Sam replied. Their brief moment of relief was interrupted by yet another zombie approaching their position, but just like the previous one, it ran directly into the overturned chairs and toppled over them. Sam quickly planted his boot firmly on the back of the creature's neck, pinning it face down to the carpet. "These things aren't exactly the brightest bulbs in the box, are they?" Sam observed. "Lucky for us," Lola agreed. She used her chair leg to crack the pinned zombie's skull, delivering several forceful blows to ensure it was permanently neutralized. In the distance, they could hear Tommy's voice echoing throughout the cavernous space as he continued to draw the attention of the remaining creatures. His non-stop string of creative profanity provided a grim soundtrack to their escape attempt. "My God, Tommy's got quite the vocabulary," Lola said, with a mixture of admiration and concern. "He told us to get to the window, and that's exactly what we're going to do," Sam replied. "Come on!" Chapter 8. The 2 paramedics rushed across the remaining distance to the wall of windows that overlooked the emergency room parking area below. Sam was intensely focused on their escape route, but Lola couldn't help glancing back in Tommy's direction, hoping to catch sight of their frequent patient and make sure he was still alive. She managed to catch a brief glimpse of him through the maze of furniture, swinging his hammer with deadly accuracy and catching a zombie squarely on the side of its head. The creature dropped instantly, and Tommy immediately jumped over a bank of chairs to continue his evasive maneuvers. He still had several zombies trailing behind him, but they were having considerable difficulty navigating through the obstacle course of overturned furniture scattered across the floor. "How in the world is he managing to do all that with only one good arm?" Lola asked with amazement. "Living on the street either kills you quick or it turns you into one tough son of a bitch," Sam replied without looking away from the window. "I'm pretty sure Tommy falls into the latter category." "No kidding," Lola agreed with newfound respect. Sam examined the window more closely, running his hands along the frame in search of an opening mechanism. His expression grew frustrated as he completed his inspection. "Damn it, there's no latch or handle anywhere," he said with disappointment. "It's just a solid pane of glass." Lola extended her wooden chair leg toward him, offering their only remaining weapon. "Here, try this," she suggested. Sam motioned for Lola to take several steps back before positioning himself in front of the window. He gripped the improvised club with both hands and swung it with as much force as his tired muscles could muster. The wood smacked against the reinforced glass with a loud crack, creating spiderweb patterns that extended out from the point of impact. He struck the window again and again, each impact creating new fracture patterns, but the safety glass was proving remarkably resilient. Sam pulled his arm back as far as possible, letting out a grunt of exertion as he delivered another powerful blow. This time, the chair leg splintered upon impact, but managed to create a small hole in the center of the web of cracks. Sam threw down what remained of the makeshift weapon in frustration, looking around the immediate area for something that might prove more effective against the stubborn barrier. His eyes focused on several tall, cocktail-style chairs that were positioned around a raised table nearby. The metal base of each chair appeared to be considerably more substantial than the wooden chair leg had been. "Let me know if we have incoming," Sam instructed. Lola nodded and took up a defensive position, while Sam rushed over to the nearby table. He grabbed one of the heavy chairs, nearly throwing his back out in the process due to the unexpected weight of the metal construction. "Oh yeah, this will definitely work," Sam said with satisfaction. Sam carried the chair back toward the damaged window, taking time to line himself up properly before beginning his approach run. He used the heavy chair like a medieval lance, treating the window as if it were an opposing knight in a jousting tournament. The strategy worked perfectly, as the solid metal base of the chair punched through the weakened glass with relative ease. "Tommy, we're out of here!" Sam yelled at the top of his lungs, hoping that their out-of-sight companion could hear him. He looked out across the public area, trying to spot Tommy among the furniture and zombies, but could only see a dense swarm of creatures clustered around something in the distance. Whatever they were attacking was hidden from view by their bodies. Sam's heart sank as he feared the worst had happened to their brave companion, but he knew they had to keep moving if they wanted to survive. He carefully climbed through the broken window onto the concrete roof that covered the emergency room entrance area. He turned back and reached through the opening, helping Lola climb outside to join him. The night air was still warm with the desert heat, but both of them tensed when they heard the unmistakable sounds of moaning and shuffling feet coming from somewhere below their position. Sam held up his hand in a signal for Lola to remain stationary while he cautiously approached the edge of the rooftop. He peered down at the ground below, which represented about a 15-foot drop to the pavement. The sight that greeted him was far from encouraging. Dozens of zombies roamed throughout the parking area, wandering aimlessly in search of fresh prey, or clustered around abandoned vehicles that might contain trapped survivors. "Well, that's not good at all," Sam muttered to himself, trying to formulate a plan for getting down safely. As he stood contemplating their limited options, he heard Lola making a clicking sound with her tongue from somewhere behind him. He spun around to see his partner standing on the opposite edge of the roof, a broad smile spreading across her face as she pointed down toward the ground below. Sam stared at her for a moment, confused by her apparent excitement, which prompted her to wave him over to her position. As he approached, she spoke in a low voice to ensure that only they could hear the conversation. "I don't know what it looks like on your side of the roof," she said quietly, "but I think this might actually work." Lola pointed down to an ambulance parked directly below their position, just a short drop from where they stood. There were several ambulances in the loading bay area, but this particular vehicle wasn't completely blocked in by other emergency vehicles. "What do you think?" she asked. "Can you get around the traffic down there?" Sam held up a finger, signaling for silence before dropping to one knee. He positioned his ear so that it was angled directly toward the ambulance below and listened intently. After a moment of concentration, a smile crossed his face when he heard the distinctive sound of an idling engine. "It's still running," he reported with relief. "I think this plan will work. Now we just have to figure out how to get down there safely without breaking our necks," Lola said. Before they could begin formulating a detailed descent plan, Tommy's voice suddenly rang out from the broken window behind them as he came diving through the opening. "We gotta move! We gotta move!" he shouted desperately. Tommy landed hard on his chest, with his injured arm pinned underneath his body. He let out a pained scream from the impact, but the injury didn't slow him down for more than a second. In a flash, he was back on his feet, running toward the others as several zombies began climbing through the window, opening in pursuit. "Looks like we're dropping down whether we're ready or not," Sam declared. "We have to go right now." Both Sam and Lola immediately dropped to their knees at the edge of the roof, grabbing onto the concrete ledge and swinging their legs over the side. They dangled for a brief moment to reduce the fall distance before releasing their grip and dropping onto the roof of the ambulance below, landing with metallic thuds but no injuries. "Make sure my ass doesn't fall off that thing," Tommy yelled down to them. Tommy looked back at the zombies that were approaching his position, getting uncomfortably close. He quickly hooked his bloody hammer to his belt and sat down on the edge of the roof, knowing he couldn't hang and drop like the others due to his injured arm. The approaching ghouls were only a few feet away when Tommy pushed himself off the edge, falling from a much greater height than the paramedics, since he couldn't dangle to reduce the distance. He landed hard on the ambulance roof, his momentum carrying him forward and nearly sending him toppling over the side into the waiting arms of the zombies gathered below. Both paramedics reacted instantly, reaching out to grab whatever part of Tommy they could reach. Lola managed to get a firm grip on his belt, while Sam caught hold of his injured arm sling, and both of them yanked backward with all their strength. Tommy let out a yelp of pain as his injured arm was jarred, but he managed to stop his forward momentum before plummeting to certain death. He quickly steadied himself on the ambulance roof. "Thanks, y'all," he said with gratitude. "That could have been really bad." Before anyone could respond, a zombie suddenly flew past Tommy's position, apparently having followed his example, and jumped from the roof above. The creature landed headfirst on the rear edge of the ambulance, the impact cracking its neck with an audible snap, before it tumbled off to land on top of other zombies gathered below. "Jesus Christ!" Tommy exclaimed. The trio quickly moved toward the front of the ambulance, getting out of the path of the falling creatures that were now coming one right after another in a macabre parade. They watched in a mixture of horror and amusement as the ghouls mindlessly followed each other off the ledge. The zombies crashed down onto the back portion of the ambulance, most of them bouncing off the metal surface to the pavement below. The few that managed to land and stick were immediately knocked off by the next falling creature in the sequence. "I realize I ain't the brightest bulb in the bunch," Tommy observed, "but those fools make me look like I've got a PhD in physics." Both paramedics let out brief laughs as the cascade of falling zombies finally came to a halt. But their amusement quickly faded as they looked around at the carnage surrounding the emergency room entrance and saw the full scope of the nightmare they were trying to escape. Dozens of zombies continued to roam throughout the parking area, many of them now drawn toward their ambulance because of all the noise from the falling bodies. Sam and Lola looked toward the hospital entrance doors, spotting several familiar faces among the undead that filled them with a deep sense of dread. These had been colleagues and patients just hours before, people they had known and worked alongside. Now they were shambling predators searching for living flesh to consume. "Come on, let's get inside this thing and get the hell out of here," Sam said grimly. The group nodded in agreement before carefully working their way toward the front of the ambulance. The driver's side door was closed, but the window had been left partially open. It took some maneuvering for Sam to climb through the opening while staying well out of reach of the zombies gathered below. Once inside the vehicle, he checked to ensure that the back doors were securely closed and that no unwanted passengers were hiding in the patient compartment. After confirming that he was alone in the ambulance, He rolled down the passenger side window and helped his companions climb inside to safety. "All right, everyone, buckle up," Sam announced as he adjusted the driver's seat, "because this is going to be one hell of a bumpy ride." Chapter 9. Sam threw the ambulance into reverse, cutting the wheel with surgical precision to narrowly miss the emergency vehicle that was parked directly behind them. He had to apply more gas than he would have preferred under normal circumstances, but they needed enough power to push through the zombie horde that had gathered in their path. The engine noise and sudden movement drew the attention of most of the creatures still trapped inside the emergency room, pulling them out through the shattered entrance doors and into the driveway where they could join the pursuit. "Hit the lights and siren," Lola instructed. "You know we're trying to escape, right?" Sam replied. "Look at those things." Lola pointed toward the streaming creatures. "They're drawn to noise. If we can pull them outside and away from the building, maybe the people who are trapped inside those patient rooms can have a chance." Sam considered her logic for a moment, recognizing that it was a considerable risk, but also understanding that Lola was absolutely right about giving the survivors their best opportunity. He reached down and flipped on the emergency lights before picking up the radio microphone and switching it to the external speaker system. "Nurse Watkins, or whoever else is still alive inside the hospital," Sam announced, his voice echoing across the parking area. "This is Sam and Lola. We're in an ambulance outside, and in a few seconds we're going to activate our siren. I'm going to let it run for 30 seconds before we start driving away from here, and I'll keep it going until we reach the main road." Sam paused for a moment to collect his thoughts before continuing with his broadcast. "I hope that this gives you an opportunity to secure the room. If any of those things are in there after we do this, you need to aim for the head. It seems to be the only way to take them down for good." Sam paused again, feeling overwhelmed by the absurdity of having to give such instructions. He shook off the surreal feeling and concluded his message. "Okay, here we go. Good luck to all of you in there." Sam reached down and activated the siren, turning the volume up as loud as the system would allow. He stared at his watch, carefully tracking the second hand as it moved around the dial. While he monitored the time, Lola and Tommy watched in fascination as zombies continued pouring out of the emergency room entrance, all of them heading directly toward their ambulance like moths drawn to a flame. At exactly 30 seconds, Sam hit the gas pedal again, pushing through the dense crowd of ghouls that had gathered behind their vehicle. He left the siren wailing as he executed a 3-point turn before accelerating toward the main road, creating as much noise and distraction as possible. Sam glanced in the side mirror and spotted what looked like a small army of zombies trailing after them, stumbling and running in pursuit of the loud, moving target. Once they reached the main road, he cut both the lights and siren, allowing the ambulance to fade into the darkness as they drove off into the night. They had traveled about half a mile down the road when Sam felt comfortable enough to turn the headlights back on. The moon was still hanging high in the desert sky, providing enough natural illumination to navigate, and he was confident they had lost the crowd that had been following them. "Do you need directions to get there?" Tommy asked from the back seat. "You're talking about the community on the south side of the strip by that abandoned warehouse, right?" Sam confirmed. "Yep, that's the one," Tommy replied. "I know how to get there," Sam said. "But while I drive, Lola, will you get on the radio and see if you can reach dispatch? They need to know what's happening out here." Lola nodded and picked up the radio handset, tuning it to the correct emergency frequency. "Dispatch, do you copy?" she called into the microphone. There was a long stretch of silence with nothing but static coming through the speakers in response. "Dispatch, do you copy?" she repeated with more urgency. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of painful silence, a weary voice crackled through the radio. "Who is this?" the dispatcher asked. "It's Lola and Sam," she replied. "I'm glad you two are still alive and kicking," the dispatcher responded, with what sounded like relief. "About that," Lola continued, "you need to warn the other teams out there about what's going on throughout the city." "Yeah, we know about the situation," came the flat reply. Lola and Sam exchanged a concerned look at the dispatcher's tone. "Well, maybe you can fill us in on the bigger picture," Lola said. "We just came from the hospital, and it was completely overrun with those things. Just how bad is it out there?" "It's bad, honey. Real bad," the dispatcher replied. The woman spoke with no emotion in her voice, as if her will to continue had been completely drained by the night's events. Can you give me a little more detail than that? Lola pressed. Because we're still out here trying to survive. I don't know what to tell you. I honestly don't, the dispatcher admitted with defeat. All I know is that you need to get someplace safe and stay there for as long as you possibly can. Is that what you're planning to do? Lola asked. Half of our people didn't even come in for their shifts tonight, and half of the ones who did show up have already bolted, the dispatcher explained. There are only 3 of us left in the office here, and we've locked it up as securely as we can. But some of those crazy people are already outside. Okay, dispatch, please be safe, Lola said with sympathy. Or as safe as you can at any rate. You too, Lola, the dispatcher replied. If you still have a way to contact us tomorrow, do it. We might have a better idea of just how bad this is once the sun comes up. But I'm not sure any of us are going to like the answers we get. Lola tried to formulate an appropriate response, but the words simply wouldn't come. After a moment of awkward silence, Sam took the handset from her and spoke as sympathetically as he could manage. We'll be in touch tomorrow if we can. Dispatch. Please stay safe in there. Sam tossed the microphone back onto the dashboard, and the interior of the ambulance fell into heavy silence as they continued driving through the darkened streets. After traveling for several more miles, they reached a point on the road where they could see the strip in the distance, its neon lights still illuminating the night sky in their characteristic brilliant display. From this distance, it doesn't look like anything terrible is happening, Lola observed. Girl, it always looks like that from far away, Tommy replied with wisdom born from experience. And I think we've all lived here long enough to know that there's always bad stuff happening, whether you can see it or not. Truer words have never been spoken, Sam agreed grimly. The group continued driving for what felt like hours through the mostly empty streets. They could see various signs of trouble in the darkness around them. Wrecked and abandoned cars, zombies running wild through neighborhoods, people running for cover. But there was nothing they could realistically do to help. Their only mission at the moment was self-preservation. Finally, they pulled into the entrance area of the storm drain tunnel system. On their left was a large concrete drainage reservoir, which served as the primary function of the tunnels during flash flood season. On the right stood 4 round tunnel entrances, including a maintenance access point that the people who lived there used as their primary entrance. As they pulled up to the area, Tommy suddenly became agitated, as if something was seriously wrong with the scene before them. Tommy, are you okay? Lola asked with concern. There are usually at least a dozen people hanging out on the ledges this time of night, Tommy explained nervously. But there's nobody there. Maybe they're taking cover like they should be, Sam suggested hopefully. Before Tommy could respond to that possibility, he caught sight of several dark shapes floating in the drainage reservoir. As his eyes adjusted to the lighting, he realized they were human bodies. He began stammering and shaking, the horrific sight overwhelming his already fragile mental state. Lola reached over and grabbed his uninjured hand, trying to calm him down through physical contact. Her efforts were successful in helping him regain some composure. Look, over by the main entrance, Sam said, pointing ahead. A large figure emerged from the shadows near the tunnel opening, looking at their ambulance with suspicion, but remaining stationary rather than approaching or fleeing. Well, he's not running at us, Sam observed, so he's probably still alive and human. Yeah, but is he friendly? Lola asked with concern. The 2 paramedics watched the figure with growing apprehension, but Tommy's face suddenly broke into a huge smile of recognition. That's Diesel, he exclaimed with excitement. We're good. Tommy threw open his door and jumped down onto the concrete, waving his good arm enthusiastically while calling out to the figure. Hey Diesel, it's Tommy, he shouted. I brought some friends. The large man stood motionless for several more moments before finally walking down toward the ambulance. He stopped directly in front of the vehicle, studying the occupants carefully. The man was easily 6 feet 2 inches tall, with a powerful build that suggested he could flip their ambulance over if he was so inclined. Despite his imposing physical presence, he broke into a warm smile at the sight of Tommy and walked over to embrace his friend. Man, it is really good to see you, Tommy, Diesel said with emotion. I thought I'd never see you again after everything that's happened tonight. You know me, man, Tommy replied with his characteristic humor. I'm like a bad penny. You just can't get rid of me no matter how hard you try. Who are your friends? Diesel asked, gesturing toward the ambulance. This is Sam and Lola, Tommy explained. We go way back. Pretty sure half the regulars here go way back with them too. Diesel nodded with understanding before asking, "Do you have medical supplies in the back there?" "We should," Sam confirmed. "Grab everything you can carry," Diesel instructed with urgency. "Is everything all right down there, Diesel?" Lola asked with growing concern. "It's been a very long night," Diesel replied wearily, "and people could really use your help right now." "We'll give you all the help we can," she said firmly. "Would you mind grabbing a bag?" "I'd be happy to help, ma'am," Diesel replied respectfully. "Meet me around at the back of the ambulance," Lola instructed. Diesel nodded and made his way toward the rear of the vehicle, leaving the two paramedics alone in the front compartment for a moment. "I'm not sure I like the sound of this," Sam said quietly. "They need medical supplies, and there are bodies floating in that reservoir over there." Lola leaned over and pointed to the fuel gauge, which showed less than a quarter tank remaining. "You may not like it," she replied practically, "but I don't think we have much choice in the matter. This is going to be home for the foreseeable future." Sam nodded with reluctant acceptance as Lola got up to begin packing medical bags with essential supplies. He continued staring out toward the dark shapes floating in the water, letting out a heavy sigh of resignation. What in the world happened here? The end.